Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia Daf Kuf Yud Aleph. This month's learning is sponsored by Shipper Tyberg and Rafal Wenger in loving memory of Tzvi Ben Yisrael Yitzchak Tyberg on his Yurtzeit, and in honor of their daughter's upcoming marriage to Ori Kinberg. Today's daf is sponsored by Nina Black in loving memory of her mother, Sophia Black, Sophia Bat Abraham Zichronah Lebracha, whose Yurtzeit is today. Mom was a committed Jew, a deep thinker, a lover of learning, and would be happy that I took on the commitment to do Daf Yomi. I miss her every day. We're going to get started with the bottom of Daf Kuf Yud Amud. There's a study guide for today, which will help organize. We're going to have a lot of drashot from Sukkim and kind of three approaches, and we'll hopefully the chart will help organize. So in the Zoom, I will share screen, and that will also help those who are watching. Tanu Rabbanan, starting from the bottom with the Braita, we're talking about the issue of delaying payment. Okay, so we learned yesterday that number one, you cannot delay payment. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Right. That you can't delay payment till the next day. And that kind of is a one-time thing that for that day, only the Baal Talin only applies to, again, we saw night, day, and we'll talk all about that today, but it only applies once. However, if you continuously delay payment, then you end up with a derabanan of Baal Yashhed, which is if you keep delaying it day by day, that's only rabbinic. There's no Torah prohibition beyond the first day. So now we'll get started. Tanu Rabbanan, Omer lechavero. Oh, and by the way, before we get started, since I'm already, I want to remind everyone that the Siyum is happening. The registration went up. The Siyum is happening, Esat Hashem, on June 26th, next week. So please sign up and register. Registration is up, and you'll get your own Zoom link to Zoom Siyum. We have Alana Stein-Hain, who's going to be speaking about ethical floor and the ethical ceiling from our Masechet. And we have Elaine Gottesman, one of our learners, is going to connect between her professional work that she does and what we've been learning in the Masechet. Okay, with that, we'll get started. Tanu Rabbanan. Haomer lechavero tzei uschor lipoalim. Shnehem ein ovrim mishum Baal Talin. This is a fascinating thing, and we're going to see it gets even more interesting when we see people who specifically did this to avoid the prohibition, that if you hire someone or you ask someone to just, you don't even have to hire them. You say, can you go hire workers for me? If they hire the workers and you're paying, then there's no Baal Talin. Zelafi shalos charan, v'zelafi she'en pulato etzlo. Well, the owner didn't actually hire them to work. And the other one the friend isn't getting work done for them. There's basically each one is not actually doing both things, the hiring and the getting the work done for them. So the Gemara wants to understand this a little better, says, Hechidami, what exactly is the case? Ida Amar Lehu Scharchem Alai. This is going to sound very familiar from the 6th chapter. If the agent who went to hire the workers said, I'm taking it upon myself to pay you, then Scharo Alav. Then he is responsible for the payment, in which case he's responsible for the whole thing. Okay? Ditanya Socher Tapoa La Sopashalo Verao Bishal Chavero. So let's just, before I read it inside, what we're saying is this person is fully responsible for the payment. So if they're fully responsible for the payment, even though the work isn't being done for them, the work is done for someone else, but since they're fully responsible for the payment, therefore they should be responsible for delaying the payment. So the agent takes full responsibility. How do we know this? Well, for a case that we also saw before, which is, this came up on Daf Ayin Vav. If you hire a worker to work in your own field, it's not the same case. This isn't the case of an agent, but it's very similar. You hire someone to work in your own field, and then by accident, you point over, I want you to work in that field. But by accident, you pointed not to your own field, but someone else's field. And they did the work in that person's field. You have to pay them. The responsibility is on you, even though you got no benefit from it. So this would be the same as our case. An agent sends someone, right? Hires someone for someone else. The work is done for someone else, but it doesn't matter. If they did the hiring and said, I'm paying you, then it's on them, in which case they should have the problem of delaying payment. It should be totally on them, even though not, right? What happens in that case where you hired someone to work someone else's field? Let's just finish it up. Well, in that case, so let's say I by accident showed you someone else's field. I have to pay you, which is already all we needed for our purposes, which means I'm completely responsible. But of course, since in the end, the work wasn't done for me, it was done for someone else and someone else benefited, I can go to that person and say, hey, pay me back the money of what I benefited you, not necessarily what I had to hire the worker for. It could have been more than the actual benefit you received, but for the benefit you received, I get to get the money back for that. So anyway, it can't be, if he said Schar Chamalayim, that no one's responsible, not the owner and not the agent, for delaying payment, because this case, it would be completely responsibility on the agent. So okay, it would be a case where he said, listen, let's say you go and you ask someone and say, Michelle wants me to hire you, but she's going to pay you. So if you do that, then in the end, I never agreed with you about the payment details, so I'm not responsible if I delay payment, and you're not responsible because it's not for you, you're not paying. So that would be a good case where neither is liable. Now, again, this doesn't mean that you can delay payment. It just means that if you did, you're not going to transgress the negative commandment in the Torah. And therefore, here you're going to see something really interesting, which is the rabbis use this to avoid Baal Talin. You have to understand it in this way. It's unlikely that the rabbis were trying to avoid paying their workers on time, although maybe they were. But it seems that they were just trying to avoid that if something were to happen and for whatever reason payment would have gotten delayed, they wouldn't be liable. Okay, they wanted to remove this possibility of by accident, or somehow getting to lo talin, but not in an intentional manner. So Yehuda bar Mereimar Amalei l'Shamei, he said to his shamash, Zil agarli poalim be'emalus chachema balabayit. So he said, please do this and say it exactly like this so that we can avoid this transgression. Mereimar and Merzutra agre lahadade. Mereimar and Merzutra made an arrangement. The Mereimar would hire Merzutra's workers and Merzutra would hire Mereimar's workers. And in that way, they would again avoid payment. This is a little different than agency, but it's the same idea. You hire mine, I'll hire yours, and I'm perfect. Amarabba barafuna. Hanai shuka desula. Lo avre mishum bal talin. In a place where people would wait for the day of the shuk to have money. They lived hand to mouth. They didn't have enough funds, so they would have to wait till they would sell their stuff at the shuk, and then they would have money, and then they could pay their workers. So because that was known in advance, that these are people who that's how it works, they're not over on Baal Talin. Because this, by the way, shows you that anytime we make a stipulation in the agreement that I'm not going to pay you on time, and we'll see later that if the worker doesn't demand the payment on time, also there's not such an issue. But basically, in a case where it's obvious that I don't have enough money to pay you and I have to wait for the day of the shuk, then there's no Baal Talin. And very interestingly, we said that Baal Talin is only that first morning. After that, it's a Rabbanan and Baal Yashem. So once we miss that next morning, because we're allowed to, well, then there's no more Baal Talin at all, even on the day of the shuk. But if you pass the day of the shuk and you don't pay your workers, well, it's the Rabbanan that we saw yesterday of Baal Tashem. Now we're going to start understanding these cases in the Mishnah that weren't exactly clear. So if you work per hour, you work an hourly wage rather than a day worker or a night worker, right? Remember, a day worker, you can pay them all throughout the next night. A night worker, you pay all throughout the next day. So someone who works per hour, well, I'm going to have to explain, but can get paid during the day and during the night. So, or all the night and all the day. Let's understand. Rav and Shmuel are going to have a disagreement about this. Amar Rav, schir sha'ot yom goveh kol hayom. Schir sha'ot halayla goveh kol halayla. It didn't mean you can pay them all day and all night. What it meant is if you work per hour during the day, then you can get paid till the end of that day. And if you work per hour at night, you get paid by the end of that night. Ushmuel amar, schir sha'ot yom goveh kol hayom. In the first part, he agrees. Day worker gets paid, right? Hourly wages, you get paid hourly wages during the day, you get paid all day. Schir sha'ot halayla goveh kol halayla ve'kol hayom. If you're going to work at night per hour, then you have the night and the day, probably because people just woke up early in the morning, and you can't expect everyone to have paid by the end of the morning, by the end of the night, meaning early in the morning. So they get all day, according to Shmuel. So now we're going to bring some difficulties. Okay, Tanan. Schir sha'ot goveh kol hayom v'kol halayla, tiyuv t'derav. So Rav, it doesn't make sense. Why does it say schir sha'ot goveh kol hayom v'kol halayla? It sounds like you have all day, all night, and all day, which according to Shmuel could explain. He means a schir sha'ot of the night gets paid all day and all night and all day. But Rav, how can he explain that line in the Mishnah? So Amar l'cha Rav, litzdadin katane, schir sha'ot yom govek kol yom, schir sha'ot halayla govek kol halayla. It's not a difficulty. What he means is a schir sha'ot gets paid either all night or all day, depending on whether he worked during the day or worked at night. That's not so difficult. But another difficulty against Rav, the Mishnah continues and says, here we're going to get to all these lines that we didn't really understand yesterday. Schir Shabbat, if you worked for a week, Schir Chodesh, you worked for a month, Schir Shana, you worked for a year, Schir Shavua, meaning you were hired to work for a month, for a week, for a day, for a year, or for a Shavua, for a 7-year cycle. Yotze biyom govek kol hayom, yotze balayla govek kol halayla v'chol hayom. So now you see this distinction between day and night. If you leave the job that you were hired to work for 7 years during the day, you have to get paid at the end of that day. But if you worked and finished your job at night, then you would have the night and the day to pay. So that seems to match Shmuel much better. Now, it's not the same case, but still there's this distinction. Day, you have till the end of the day, and night, you have till the end of the day, and right till the end of the night and the next day. So Amar l'cha Rav, Rav now answers, Tanai, it's a machloket Tanaim. Tanya, as it says in a Braita, schir sha'ot yom govek kol hayom, schir sha'ot halayla govek kol halayla divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So here's the opinion that Rav says, I agree with Rabbi Yehuda, who sets it up day, day, night, night. Rabbi Shimon Omer, schir sha'ot yom govek kol hayom, schir sha'ot halayla govek kol halayla v'kol hayom. And that matches Shmuel. So basically, if you're going to bring the Mishnah to disagree with me, I'll just tell you that that's Rabbi Yehuda, and I hold, that's Rabbi Shimon, and I hold like Rabbi Yehuda. Mikan amru, from the Braita continues, and here we're going to start on something else. Kol hakovesh schar sachir over b'chamisha shemot halalu ve'aseh. Anyone who doesn't pay a worker on time is going against 5 negative transgressions and 1 mitzvah aseh. And now we're going to list them. Mishum bal ta'ashok et re'echa. Don't oppress your friend, meaning hold back salary. Umishum. Okay, that's a pasuk in Vayikra Yud Tet Yud Gimel. Okay, I want to look at the psukim. I'm going to put up the study guide. Okay, so came in late. There's a study guide today. Let me just find it. I have it on my computer. Find it 1 second. Here. Okay. So now I'm going to pull it up. Okay, here's our list of things. Before that, I'm going to read the psukim. Okay, so let's just read Vayikra Yud Tet. We're going to have a lot back and forth on this today, so get these psukim clear in your head. Vayikra chapter 19, verse 13. Lo ta'ashok et re'echa, that's the pasuk we just quoted. V'lo tigzol, we're going to have to talk about what's the difference between oshek and getzel. Lo talim pu'ulat sachiritcha boker. Okay, and this is what we call schirut yom, right? If they work during the day, don't push off the salary until the next morning. In Dvarim, chapter 24, it talks about schirut laila, which is somebody who works at night. Pasuk Yudala lo ta'ashok sachir ani ve'evyon. Okay, here notice specifically it's talking about poor people. Okay, don't hold back from poor people. Me'achecha, from your brother. Omi gercha asher ba'artzecha v'sharecha. We're going to darshan all these words later. From your brother, from a ger who's living in your land, in your gates. Biyomo titen scharo. Pay him on that day. That's what we learned yesterday already about. You have to pay. You have all day to pay. Below tavo alav hashemesh, that means basically, and the sun shouldn't set. Ki anihu, notice it appears again, he's poor. Be'lavu noseh nafsho, he needs you to pay him basically. Below yikra alav Hashem v'yabachachet, he shouldn't cry out to God and you'll be sinning. So now let's go through all the psukim, all the problems. Bal ta'ashok et re'echa, that's the first one, from Vayikra Yud Tet Yud Gimel. Umishum bal tigzol, in that same pasuk it says don't steal. Umishum bal ta'ashok sachir ani, now we're jumping to Yud Dvarim, Kapdal and Yud Dalet. Umishum bal talin, which is also there, right? Bal talin, lo yalin is in Vayikra. Okay, that's back to Vayikra. Umishum biyomot titen scharo, which is the mitzvah aseh, back to Dvarim. It's going back and forth. I don't know why this order. Umishum lo tavo alav hashemesh. There's another one, right? And the sun shouldn't set on him. That's an additional negative prohibition. Okay, now it doesn't mean that any time you delay, you're going to be transgressing all of these, because some are night and some are day. But it does mean that there's a lot of negative commandments associated with this and one positive commandment. And that's what they're saying now. Hanidi could be a mama, lekabalelia, dikabalelia, lekabiyamama. Okay, some are only at night, some are only during the day. Amar Rav Chisda, shem schirut be'alma. So, right, so the Gemara was asking a question, but some are at night, some are in the day. So Rav Chisda is saying, it's just saying these are all ones that are associated with this problem. Okay, now we have to get to this difference between ezu oshek ve'ezu gezel. Okay, and here we're going to pull up the chart again, because here we're going to see differences of opinion about oshek and gezel. What is what? Okay. What is oshek? What is gezel? Amar Rav Chisda, lech v'shuv, lech v'shuv. Okay. In other words, you go to get your salary, and the person says, "Oh, go and come back." And then the next time they come, you say, "Go and come back." That's l'ashok someone. Zeu oshek. Yesh l'cha biyadi ve'eni noten l'cha zeu gezel. To say, "Oh, I have the money," right? This one is like, "Oh, I don't have the money. Come back tomorrow." That's also forbidden. But gezel is, I have the money, but you know what? I'm not going to give it to you. That's called theft. In this, again, this is theft in this context. Matkefla Rav Sheshet, ezu oshek shechiva alav Torah korban. So wait, Rav Sheshet comes and says, there's a different pasuk. Okay, there's a pasuk we've seen many times. It's in Vayikra chapter 5, verse 21. It says, this is when you bring a korban for lying. Okay, and asham gzelo. So nefesh ki tachtal ma'ala ma'al v'Hashem b'chleichesh b'mito. So someone who sins does ma'al, and they deny something. This is the key word. They deny something that someone claims they owe them. B'pikadon, o b'tzumet yad, o b'gezel, o ashaket amito. So either a pikadon or tzumet yad that you use the pikadon, or b'gezel or oshek. So now they're going to say the following. Rav Sheshet says to Rav Chisda, ezu oshek shechiva alav Torah korban junia de pikadon kakafra lemamona. What kind of oshek is mentioned in that pasuk? Which then we assume if oshek is that pasuk, then oshek in our pasuk as well is going to be where you deny a claim, because there it's listed with pikadon. What's a pikadon? When you deny, someone gave you something to watch and you say, you didn't give it to me to watch, or I don't have it. Okay, so the oshek would have to have a denial. Now, lech shuv is not a denial. You say, yes, I owe you, but come back tomorrow, come back tomorrow. So Rav Sheshet says it can't be. Oshek must have some sort of denial. Ela amar Rav Sheshet, nitativ lecha zehu oshek. Okay, so nitativ lecha, did something wrong. Okay, I did something wrong here on the chart. Here, it should be the kfirah. The kfirah should move over there. I'll have to fix it after class. On the kfirah, I put in the wrong place. Nitativ lecha is kfirah. Kfirah is saying, I gave it to you. I don't owe you anything. That's oshek. Yesh lecha biyadi ve'eni noten lecha. And then he agrees with Rav Chisda about gezel. Well, gezel is, yes, I have it. I'm just not giving it to you. Now, that's not kfirah. That's not denying. It's just saying, I'm not going to give it to you, but it's not a denial. So sorry, I flipped it in the chart by accident. Anyway, zeu gezel. Matkefla Abaye. Abaye says, wait a minute. Your whole proof, Rav Sheshet, that went against Rav Chisda was that pasuk about nefesh ki tafta, which by the way is on the sheet. Nefesh ki tafta ma'alama b'chesh b'mito b'pikadon tzumiyah b'gezel o b'gazel o ashaket amito. Now, it says here b'gazel o ashak. So now, if you're saying oshek is like pikadon, is that there has to be a denial, then why wouldn't you say the same thing about gezel? Now, gezel should also have to have a denial. Matkefla Abaye ezu gezel shechiva alav Torah korban jumiyat pikadon b'inan dekakafar lemamona. So why did you not have a kfirah by gezel and you only put it by oshek? Ela amar Abaye lo scharticha me'olam zehu oshek. So Abaye says lo scharticha me'olam. I never even hired you, which by the way is also kfirah. That's oshek. And nitativ lecha zeu gezel. There's a difference between them, but both are denials. Nitativ lecha is gezel, which is total kfirah. Okay, and that's how he sets up the difference between the two, but both are totally, completely denying a claim. That's when you're over on gezel and on oshek if you said the following things. Ula Rav Sheshet, mashna oshek de kashile, or mashna gezel de lo kashile. So now they want to understand Rav Sheshet. Yeah, really. Why did Rav Sheshet say only one had to be kfirah, right? Only oshek had to be kfirah and didn't say the same by gezel. Amar lacha, gazel de gazle v'hadar kafri. So he says gezel in the pasuk there is a case where first he stole it and then he denied it. In other words, what he's saying is the gezel in that pasuk has to be a kfirah, but gezel has two parts to it. One is stealing and then one is denying it. But who's to say there are pasukas including the stealing and the denial? Our pasuk could just be talking about the stealing part. There, it's talking about you stole and then you denied that you stole. So why didn't he explain oshek that way? Why couldn't he explain there were two stages? So I say, no, there's a difference. The real reason he distinguished between gezel and oshek and didn't think that gezel always has to be a denial and that oshek is just a denial, because hachi ashta bishlama hatan ktiv o begazel michlal de odile mi kara. Aval gabe oshek miktiv o beoshek o ashak ktiv sha'ashako kval. Okay, so what he's playing off on is in this pasuk, it says, O vigazel, O ashak. Now it doesn't say O bit oshek, like it says O bigazel. Because it says bit, it means a gezel that you denied a claim where there was a gezel already. And that's why the gezel has two parts. It was stolen, you really did steal it, and then you denied it. Whereas oshek, there's only a denial. And that's oshek by definition is denial, and there is no that you did oshek and then denied it. Okay, that's why Rav Sheshik distinguished and thought that oshek has to have kfira, but gezel doesn't, because gezel in that pasuk had two stages, so we could say the gezel in our pasuk is only that first stage. And now we get to a fourth. So until now we had, okay, I'm not going to review it. You can look at the chart to review, but we had three different approaches to what is oshek, what is gezel. The operating assumption was they're two different things. Comes Rava, and Rava says, Rav Amar zeu oshek zeu gezel. Rav has a much simpler answer. Oshek and gezel are exactly the same thing. It just said two words to describe the same thing. And it was just to say that if you do this, you basically are liable for two sins. What's interesting is that it doesn't say which definition. So some people say it's all lich v'shuv. Some people say it's nitativ l'cha, it's a denial. It's unclear what Rava thinks the definition of them is, but the main point Rava says is there's really no distinction. Okay, now moving to our second topic for today. It's still within the same topic. Okay, we're talking about delaying payment, but now the question is, how far does delaying of payment extend? Okay, to what we assumed right now we're talking about you don't pay your worker on time, but now we're going to learn that it extends to other cases as well. So, and other people as well, not just Jews, and that's going to be interesting. So, Mishnah. Echad sachar adam, echad sachar behema, echad sachar kelim yesh bo mishum biyamot titein scharo. Whether you're hiring a person or you're renting an animal or you're renting a vessel, any kind of rental agreement or hiring agreement includes this issue of biyamot titein scharo. Now, v'yesh bo mishum lo talim pu'ulat zachir itcha ad boker. Okay, so now let's just look at the psukim. Lo talin is vayikra yutet, and right? And biyamot titein scharo is in Devarim. We're going to have a big three-way debate, as you can see by the chart here, on which psukim apply in which cases. Okay, you're going to see, for example, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda thinks that by sachar behema kelim, it's only lo ta'ashel, and not, okay, which is pasuk yud, Dvarim yud, vayikra, and not Devarim. No, sorry. No, it's confusing because lo ta'ashel appears actually in vayikra and Devarim. He's going to say it's only Dvarim, okay? And we'll see why in a minute. But we're basically going to have this debate whether both psukim apply, schirut yom and schirut laila, or only some psukim. So again, our Mishnah says there's biyamot titein scharo and lo talim. Both of those apply. Okay, that's our Mishnah, which we're going to see soon is Tana de Rabbi Yishmael. Ematai. So right now we're just on our Mishnah, which is just going to be the first column. So now, ematai bizman she'tuva'o, and this is what I said before. It's only going to apply when the person comes and says, "Give me my money." Lo tva'o, but if sometimes you have someone who works in your house and they don't care if you pay them next week, that's fine. Eino over ala. Kimchao etzel chemvani, another exemption. Okay, we talked about exemptions before. If you basically don't have the money, so you go to the nearest storekeeper who has money because he has cash in hand. You ask him, "Can you please?" Just like people go to the store and say, "Can I pay you later?" So you say, "Can you please pay my workers for me and I'll give you the money later." Oh, it's a shulchani or a money lender or a money, usually they were money exchangers, but they also had cash on them. Eino over ala. Now here, let's say I go to my local money changer and I say, "Please pay my worker," and then they don't pay the worker. So again, it's not me. There's no baal tali. Sachir bizmano nishba v'notel, avar zmano eino nishba v'notel. Okay, now we get into the issue of who's believed if, let's say the worker claims I didn't pay them and I claim I paid them. So it all depends on the timing. If it's before the time I was supposed to pay them and they say I didn't pay them, Yeah, which makes sense because usually I don't pay before the time I'm supposed to pay. So then they take an oath and can get the money out of me. Usually, when cases where there's an oath, it's to exempt yourself. Here, no, they take an oath and get paid. But if it's already beyond the time, and then the person claims you never paid me, we assume I paid because it's beyond the time I should have paid. So then he can't take an oath in order to get paid. If there were witnesses, though, that I paid, if there were witnesses that come back and say, let's say it's 2 days after I was supposed to pay, and they claim I never paid them, I should be believed. But if they come and say, but wait, I have witnesses that say that I tried to get you to pay at the time and you didn't pay me, then he can be nishba v'notel. Okay, now we're back to this chart, which is where do these halachot apply? It's a bit of a strange order of the Mishnah. You would have thought this came before, but it doesn't. Ger toshav yesh bo mishum biyomot yitain scharo ve'ein bo mishum lo talim pulat tzachir itcha boken. Now we're going to learn that even though the Mishnah said that Be'emai and Kelim apply, both the Psukim of Vayikra apply, and the Psukim of Devarim, Yer Toshav, only the Pasuk Tevav, B'yomot yitain scharo applies, which is basically only Schirut Laila, and it seems to be saying only a mitzvah aseh. Okay, there's only a commandment to make sure to pay on time, but there's no negative transgression. Now, who's a Ger Toshav? Someone, usually the explanation is someone who keeps the 7 Noachide laws. So if you hire someone like that, you have an obligation to pay them on time. Okay, but you don't have the negative transgression. Okay, the main topic of the rest of the class is not going to be all those things in the middle of the Mishnah, but the beginning part, Schar Be'emai Kelim and the Ger Toshav. So Mani Maniti, who does our Mishnah coincide with? Lo Tanakama Demeachecha v'lo Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. There's this machloket between Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, and it matches neither of them. So let's see. So what are these two opinions? Tanya, moving now to Amabet. We're now going to darshan this pasuk. Okay, and this is why the pasukim are here. Tvarim kaf dalid yud dalid lo ta'ashok sachir ani v'evyom. We'll get back to that later. Me'achecha, from your brother, omi gercha, or from a convert, which means a regular convert. But we'll see asher ba'artzecha bisharecha. So now we're going to see me'achecha. What do we learn from all these words? It's a lot of words. So what do we learn from all them? Okay, that means, right, not others who are not like Ovdei Kochavim, for example, pagans, okay? Has to be fellow Jews. But Gercha ze ger tzedek, that's a fair and square ger, legit, a full ger, I would say, a convert. Bish arecha ze ochel nevelot. Bish arecha, why does it say from the ger that is in your land, in your gates? In your gates are those who keep the 7 mitzvot. They're kind of like in your wings because they keep the mitzvot. That's someone who eats nevelot, okay? He eats non-kosher, but he keeps the 7 Noachide laws, okay? Or keeps some sort of form of, mitzvot. We don't know exactly. I mean, again, most people think it's the 7 Noachide laws. Yeah. Sachar Adam. So that taught us where we get the Ger Toshav from. And notice what psukim it's in. It's in Dvarim Kaf Daled. Okay? And that's what we're going to see, that the Ger Toshav is only, right, Pasuk Tevav is the only thing that applied to the Ger Toshav, according to our Tana. Okay? So we'll get back to that, right? You would think Lo Ta'ashok should apply as well. Well, we'll see. Different people think that, but not everyone. So now, Minayin l'rabot be'emai u'kelim, Talmud lomar be'artzecha, kol she'ba'artzecha. Okay, so ba'artzecha, we didn't darshan yet. We skipped that word. In your land means any sort of arrangement that you make, including rental of equipment. V'kulam movrim b'chol hashemot halalu. And then once we include be'emai and kelim, we now include them for everything. Everything means all the mitzvah lo ta'aseh and vayikra and all the ones in Dvarim. Mikan amru, chad sachar adam, chad sachar be'emai, chad sachar kelim, yesh b'mishum yomot yitain scharo, yesh b'mishum bal talim pu'ulat sachir. Okay, those are the 2 psukim in Vayikra and in Dvarim. Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Okay, so notice that that's different, right? So the Tana Kama there agrees, and this is why I charted it out, with our Tana about Sachar Be'emai U'kelim, that it's both B'yomot yitain scharo and Lo Talin, but disagrees about the Ger Toshav issue, because he says with the Ger Toshav, there's also Lo Talin, the Schirut Yom Pasuk applies, even though our Tana didn't think so. Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Ger Toshav ein bo mishum b'yomot. By the way, we haven't learned yet. Right now, we're only learning what they darshan. We haven't learned how they darshan it. We're going to get to that. That's the next chart on the page. Ger toshav yesh bo mishum biyamot titen scharo ve'ein bo mishum lo talim. Oh, that matches perfectly with our Mishnah, right? Ger toshav is only the psukim, right? The pasuk in Dvarim, pasuk Teva, but there is no vayikra lo talim. Behema ve'kelim ein behem mishum bal ta'ashok bilvad. But behema and kelim ein behem ela mishum bal ta'ashok. Well, comes Rabbi Yossi and says, only the pasuk lo ta'ashok sachir ani ve'avion me'achecha. That's the only pasuk that applies to behema and kelim, and not lo talim. Now that's different from our Mishnah. So you see, the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda each agree on one issue with our Mishnah, but disagree on another issue. So that's why they came and asked, who does our Mishnah match? Mani, I Tanna Kama de me'achecha kasha ger tosha. I Rabbi Yossi kasha behema ve'kelim. So comes Rava and answers the question. Amar Rava. Hi, Tana debei Rabbi Yishmael. There's a third opinion. You've brought Tanna Kama who argue with Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, but there's a different Braita from the house of Rabbi Yishmael, and that matches our Mishnah perfectly. Let's see. Echad sachar adam, echad sachar behema, echad sachar kelim. Yesh bo mishum biyamot titen scharo, umishum lo talim. Ger toshav yesh bo mishum biyamot titen scharo, ve'ein bo mishum lo bal talim. There you have it, exactly matching our Mishnah. My time at the Tanna Kama de me'achecha. Okay, now we're going to move to explain. Okay, what's the, here, actually not yet. We won't go look at that chart yet. So my time at the Tanna Kama me'achecha, gamar sachir sachir. Okay, how did the Tanna Kama of the Braita get the fact that the ger toshav, that the ger toshav is applying to both? I'm sorry, the truth is, he says everything applies everywhere. And that's because he has a Gzera Shava. Sachir, it says, Lo talim pu'ulat sachir itcha boker vayikra. And it says, Lo ta'ashok sachir ani ve'avion in Dvarim. So we basically say, whatever's true there is true there. So since we have in the Psukim in Dvarim, Behema and Kelim, the reference to that from the words Ba'artzecha, anything in your Aretz, and the Ger from the word Bisharecha. So we're going to apply from Gzera Shava everything also in Vayikra, because we're going to say, oh, that pasuk says Sachir, and the pasuk in Vayikra says Sachir. Let's learn all from one to the other. That's very simple, because it's the all-inclusive, everything. It's more complicated why you would distinguish some and not others. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, lo gamar sachar Sachir. Okay, so now, he doesn't learn that Gzera Shava. Okay, fine, we got that. Now, Nihida lo gamar sachar Sachir Sachir, so now we're going to say, wait, if he doesn't learn Sachar Sachir, then Behema and Kelim, how does he get Mishum biyamot titen scharo nami nechayev? In other words, even if he doesn't, he says, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says, it's only the pasuk lo ta'ashok applies. Why? Because pasuk Yudalit says lo ta'ashok sachir nevevion sher ba'artzecha bisharecha. Now, even if you don't have the Gzera Shava to learn all the way back there to Vayikra, but the next pasuk is biyamot titen scharo, the mitzvah naseh. Why doesn't he have the mitzvah naseh for behema and kelim? So we have to explain that. That doesn't make any sense. And now we're going to jump to the next chart. Okay, that's our problem. And now we're going to see Tani Rabbi Chanina. Okay, so Rabbi Chanina brought this Braita that explained. Amar Kra lo tavo alav hashemesh ki anihu. Okay, I brought you the psukim again here at the bottom of the second page so that you have the psukim in front of you. Okay, lo tavo alav hashemesh. That's at the bottom here in Dvarim Kaf Dalid Tevav ki anihu. Okay, so whole question here was why isn't biyamot titen scharo relevant to also sachar behema and kelim? That's the big question, right? Because if behema and kelim appears in pasuk Dalid, why in the word ba'artzecha, then why wouldn't the next pasuk be applicable as well? So now comes Rabbi Chanina and he brings this Braita that basically says these words biyamot titen scharo are followed by the lo tavo alav hashemesh, and the sun shouldn't set on you. Why? Ki anihu, because he is poor. Now, who's poor? Not the behema, not the kelim, right? But a person. That shows this pasuk, mishe hen ba'in lidei aniyut v'ashirut. It can only apply that pasuk, pay the person on time, if the person can become potentially poor. If you're talking about a rental of equipment, now, of course, rental of equipment is renting from a person, but the assumption here is that it's relating to the equipment, to what you're renting. If you're renting equipment, well, that can't become poor. So therefore, and that's how we get out of the picture. According to Rabbi Yossi, this answered our question, is not applicable, that pasuk, because that pasuk is specifically to someone who could become an ani. Okay, now, Tanna Kama, who thinks this pasuk applies as well, what's he going to say? Because he says, right, everything is across the board for everyone. Hi, Kianihu, my avidle. What does he do? And here you can look at the chart. We're going to chart out, right, what everyone does with these psukim. Oh, this is an interesting halacha. If you have two people to pay, and one is poor and one is rich, comes the Tanna Kama and says, Biomoti tein scharo, give it on time to the person who needs it more, to the poor person, before you give it to the rich person. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, where's he going to learn that from? That's an important halacha. Well, he learns it from a different pasuk in this section. Ahumi lo ta'ashok sachir ani ve'evyon. Remember I told you before, it says in the psukim, right? Don't, right? It says, number one, it says, B'yamoti tein scharo v'lo taval alav shemesh ki anihu. But in the pasuk before, it says, lo ta'ashok sachir ani ve'evyon. Why does it mention the ani twice? So, what, right? So again, the Tanna Kama there is going to explain, Rabbi Yossi, Tanna Kama of our mission is going to explain it's like the ani lashir, the kianihu. But Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda is going to learn it from the other place. Ani ve'evyon comes to say, ani comes before ashir. So now the obvious question, Tanna Kama, well, the Tanna Kama of our mission, where are they going to learn it from? In other words, if they could learn it from lo ta'ashok sachir ani ve'evyon, then why are they learning it from kianihu? Why do you need two? Well, this is an interesting halacha. Okay. This is to say, okay, there's a hierarchy, or let's just talk about rich. There's rich, ashir, there's poor, ani, and there's evyon, which is really poor. Now, what we're now going to learn is, ki ani ve'evyon comes to teach you, the ani and evyon come before the ashir, the rich person. Ki anihu comes to teach you, the ani comes before the evyon. It's really interesting. You would think the super poor person would come first. No, ani comes first. Now, why? We're going to explain. Sricha, why did you need both? You would say maybe the evyon comes before the evyon. You might not have thought because the evyon is not embarrassed to ask for the money. Aval ashir, the kasef limitbe emalo. Maybe since the ashir is embarrassed, maybe it's not applicable. In other words, what they're saying here is you might have thought that an ani comes before, what they're asking here, I didn't explain it well. Why does the ani come before an evyon? Ani comes before an evyon because the evyon is not embarrassed to ask for their money. So therefore the ani is in between, is more embarrassed to ask for their money. So that's why the ani will come before the evyon. But you might think, but when it comes to an ashir, the kasef lemitbe emalo, but both an ani and an ashir, right, are embarrassed to ask for money. So maybe it wouldn't come first. If you just had the ashir, you would say, oh, obviously an ani comes before an ashir because ashir doesn't need the money. But an evyon who needs the money, maybe not. Sricha, maybe the evyon would come first. So basically we have to show that the ani comes before the ashir and the ani comes before the evyon. Okay? So now, Tana didan manavsha. So now our Tana is going to say, right, this whole thing was all, right, why you need, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda needs both, right? So now they're going to say, second, Tana didan manavsha. So now they're going to ask a question on Tana didan and say like this. Now we have to figure out where our Tana gets their theory about the ger toshav and the, right, remember, our Tana in our Mishnah distinguish between Sachar, Beima, Kelim is both psukim apply, both sections, Dvarim and Vayikra, and ger toshav is only the psukim and Dvarim. So now we say, I don't get it. Either you have the Gzeira Shava, afilu ger toshav nam. Right? So either you have the Gzeira Shava, and then the Gzeira Shava, which was Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, who basically said, Tanna Kama of the Braita, who basically said, Sachir, you're going to learn everything to everything. But our Tana does some things, right? Be'eman kelim, we're going to learn everything, but not ger toshav. So if you have sachir, then you should learn even for ger toshav, because everything in that pasuk also we're going to learn to the psukim in Vayikra. But if you don't have it, then how are you learning for sachar be'eman kelim that are also right? In other words, again, everything comes from the words be'artzecha and bisharecha. So basically, we're going to either say it says sachir in that pasuk, so we're going to learn also from the sachir and Vayikra, okay? Or we're going to learn nothing. So how do we get this in between? This we're going to learn, that we're not going to learn. So la'olam lo yalif sachir. We don't really have Gzeira Shava, the Tanakam of our Mishnah. B'shanei hatam, but why did they learn sachar be'eman kelim? Da'amar kra lo talim pu'ulat sachir itcha ad boker. That's the pasuk in Vayikra. Lo talim pu'ulat sachir itcha ad boker. Okay, that part of the pasuk. Kol shepu'ulatcha itcha. The real word here is itcha. What are we doing with this word itcha? Itcha is coming to teach you, with you, anything that's with you, anything that someone does work with you. Pu'ulat itcha. Kol shepu'ulato itcha, which would include also be'eman kelim. So they say, okay, well, ihachi afilu ger toshav nami. To which they say, amar kra re'echa velo ger toshav. So they say, that pasuk said lo tashaka re'echa. Re'echa means fellow Jew, not someone who's not a Jew. Because remember, he's not a ger, he's a ger, right, who does sheva mitzvot b'nei noach. He's not a Jew. So ihachi afilu be'eman kelim nami. So wait, if it says re'echa, your friend, then that should exclude be'eman kelim. So they say no, because haktiv itcha. No, itcha, again, re'echa is excluding. Itcha is including. So now we have the classic question always, mara'ita. So again, one is going to limit it, not ger toshav. One is going to extend it to also be'eman kelim. So they say, why did you do it in that order? Why don't you flip it? It sounds arbitrary, right? If it's going to be including one thing, excluding the other, maybe you could have done it the reverse. Mistabra, no, because it's more logical. By the way, I'm moving down to the other chart because here you have the re'echa velo ger toshav, right? So now we're going to say, Mistabra be'ema v'kelim havalela rabot sheken yeshnam bichlal mamon re'echa ger toshav eno bichlal mamon re'echa. Well, right, still, the beheman kelim are owned by Jews, so they're part of the property of a Jew, whereas the ger toshav is not part of the property of a Jew at all. Okay, and that's why we distinguish and we say re'echa is coming to say re'echa, but not a ger toshav, and itcha is coming to include kol shepu'ulatcha itcha. Okay, and that's these two drush showed here on the page. Okay, now Tanakama de me'achecha. Okay, now if you remember, this was Tanakama of our Mishnah, who had this distinction. Now, Tanakama of the Braita already said sachir learns one to the other. So therefore, you don't need re'echa to say not ger toshav, because actually a ger toshav is included. So what's he going to do with re'echa? If re'echa doesn't mean excluding a ger toshav, what is it excluding? Hi re'echa ma'afdeh. Because remember, he did sachir. So we are going to apply Vayikra Yud Tet also to a ger toshav. So what's he going to do with this word re'echa? Re'echa velo, it actually doesn't match yet what it says on the daf. You'll see in a minute. Hi re'echa ma'avdei. We need it for the following Braita. Re'echa velo amaleki. Okay, not someone from Amalek. Now you'll see it's not there yet because they change it a little. They say, what do you mean? Amaleki me achecha nafka. But it already says achecha. Because remember, according to, okay, let's just go to the psukim. Where's achecha? In Devarim Yud Daled. Okay, and re'echa is in Vayikra. Okay, so one is in Devarim, one is in Vayikra, but according to Tanakam of the Braita, sachir, right? It says sachir here, it says sachir there. Everything that's true for one is true for the other. So you already learned an Amaleki is already excluded from achecha. So they say, chad mishra oshko, chad mishra gozlo. And this is a bit of a hard pasuk to swallow, but a hard drasha to follow. This is saying one is to say there's no problem of gezela, and one is to say there's no problem of oshek. Okay, and that's why there's two. Okay, so me'achecha would be the oshek, and the lo tali, right? The lo tashoka re'echa velo tigzol also says gezela there. That would mean also gozlo. Okay, or maybe the reverse, lo tashoka re'echa, and then the other is me'achecha would be the gezela. Okay, now this basically means you're allowed to not pay or do gezel, and as again, however we define gezel and oshek in terms of this, if you have a Gentile worker, no problem of not paying them. So now, which is a hard thing to swallow. Now, could you just see there's no isser? So the language here is it's okay. It's permitted. It's permitted to delay payment. So now they're going to say, and again, even might be more as even deny payment, which is a little hard to swallow. Utsricha. Now, why do you need both? Why do you need oshek and gezela to say it's both? Well, yesh minan gezelo. So now it seems like we're even talking about stealing in general from them. Mishum de lo tarachbe. Now, gezela of a Gentile could be if you steal something. Now they seem to be going out of the world of just delaying payment, but there's gezela and oshek. Oshek we're going to define as not paying someone for work they do, and gezela is stealing. Seems like there's no problem with stealing or oshek when it comes to a Gentile. Like I said, a complicated sugya. I'm not going to be able to deal with it too much today in terms of, philosophical, how do we deal with this? But it is a question. But now the question is, why do we need both? What's the unique difference between each that we needed to tell you both? Now, if you steal something of someone's, they didn't necessarily work hard to get it. They could have gotten it as a gift, as inheritance. They could have stolen it themselves. Okay, they didn't necessarily. Okay, they might have. They didn't necessarily work hard for it. But oshko, to not pay them, ditarach gabeim alone. But you might say, right, oshek, they've worked hard for it. You might not say it's okay. You might have said, maybe you can't do that. Oshko is just preventing them from getting something they haven't gotten yet. Right? They should get paid for it, but they haven't. It's not like taking something away from them. Okay, but gzelo already is in their hands, so to take it away might be much worse, and you might not be able to. That's why you need them both. Okay, back to Rabbi Yotzi, Rabbi Yehuda. This is what we're doing. We're going back to all the opinions. Hi, lo talim pulat zachir itcha boker my avidle. So now, what does he do with lo talim pulat zachir itcha boker? Because remember, what did itcha come to include? Kol shepulat itcha, which came to include also, according to the time of our Mishnah. Also, let's just go back to our chart. Also, Sachar Beiman Kelim. Rabbi Yehuda said, no, that pasuk is not relevant to Beiman Kelim. So what does he do with that pasuk? Last thing for today. Okay, now, this is, even if someone hired you for some very small job, you still have, because that's what it says, Lo talim pu'ulat zachir itcha, anything someone does with you, even some really small job. And we'll just finish with idach. Where do the others learn this from? Ve'elav hu noseh et nafsho nafked. We didn't really talk about that, but that was the very end, or toward the end of the pasuk in Dvarim, pasuk tevav. Elav hu noseh et nafsho. He's dependent on you. What is that? What do we learn from this? Davar hamoser nafsho alav. Anyone who's moser nefesh on something, who puts effort into something, it doesn't matter if it's a little bit of effort. As long as they worked a little bit, okay, right, which is, what they said here is to cut one eshkol of grapes. Still, if you don't pay them, you're liable. Okay, so quick review of today. It's hard to do. It's a long doc, but we basically started with the details of when there's Baal Talim, what ways can you avoid it, right? If other people hire and things like that. We had to understand the Kol HaLayla v'Kol HaYom in the Mishnah. Did that mean it? We saw Machloket Rav and Shmuel, which was based on the Tannaitic debate about really how it works. Then we talked about how do we define what's oshek, what's gezel. That was the opinions here. Is there really a difference between them? Rava thought not, but all the other people thought they did. And then the question is, does it need to include some sort of firah or not? And then we went to these three opinions about whether sachar behemayim kelim and ger toshav, whether all the psukim apply to them, some of the psukim apply to them, or none, or only one pasuk applies to each. Right, to both of them, because they're all learned out from one pasuk in Dvarim, and maybe only the pasukim in Dvarim apply to them. That was Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, whereas Tanakama and the Mishnah had, either Tanakama was in the bright had everything applies to everywhere because the Gzeira Shava, and then our Mishnah, which did half. Some apply to everything, right? Some both pasukim apply for the Beiman Kilim, and for the Ger Toshav only that pasuk, and then we had to figure out the Gzeira Shava, where did they get it from, and then we learned it from a different drasha, and then we went and did this ping pong of all the drashot and how each of them understand each of these psukim. That's it for today. Wishing everyone a good day.